I remember one of our sessions getting off the call and being like, wow, it was that moment where I was like, this had nothing to do with me.
Hello, beautiful. Welcome to Aesthetic Influencers, where we explore the world of medical aesthetics and the relationship between inner and outer beauty. We're on a mission to empower 1 million women a day to level up their look and their life through the Bianca lifestyle of beauty, intelligent decision-making, attractiveness, and noble character attributes. I'm your host, Marco Emilio Valle, and you're gonna love today's show. Sam, you have been going to group trauma coaching sessions with Caren for about 5 months now.
Yes.
What's that been like?
Oh, it's been a whirlwind. I mean, I think it's one thing to do any sort of counseling therapy one-on-one, but when you have other people that are included, you're having to be vulnerable with more than just one person. So at this point, it's a few people that get to know your story, what you're working through. And so that was an interesting dynamic for me. I've done counseling, I've done therapy, but I've never done it in this group setting. And so I think it helped me push past a lot of barriers and mindsets that I had, trust issues, allowing these women to have an inside look of the not so pretty things that aren't on the table, was really, really, really interesting for me, has been very interesting. But I will say, I think it's been even greater healing because there is that element of having to allow people to come into this space and trust them and believe that they're safe people. And so you're thrown into it. It's not time spent to build the trust. You're from day one, you're having to trust. You're having to choose that. And so that broke some walls down for me, for sure.
Caren, you talk about big T traumas and little t traumas. Unpack those for us.
Yeah, so big T traumas. So many of us have had them, right? Where I think of being in a home, maybe you had a sibling who had a mental illness or a physical ailment, right? And the whole family had to focus on that sibling, right? The big T is that the sibling is injured, and that's very traumatic for the family. But the little t is the messages that you now had caring for a sibling who was ill or injured, right? They gave all the attention to this sibling, so you had to be really well behaved, so you didn't add any extra pressure. And so like there's so many different stories. So we have the big T, and then we have all the little T's that go around it, which is the messages we adopt.
What little t and big T traumas has this 5-month coaching experience?
We're going there.
Yes.
We're going there. Wow. Okay.
That you feel comfortable sharing.
Yeah, totally. So I think the biggest thing I've worked through and a theme throughout my life is my mom and dad separated when I was 9 months old. And my dad moved back to California, and I did not have a relationship with him. I met him when I was 16 years old, talked to him for the first time when I was 16. So that obviously is very traumatic for a little girl growing up without having that father figure, and created a lot of trauma, and it attached itself to a lot of belief systems that I had. One of those being I was abandoned. So automatically my brain goes to, I'm not good enough. What is wrong with me? Like, why did my dad leave me? And so I had to unpack that and come to the realization that that is his own heart issue. That's his own life. I'm separate from that. You know what I mean? And I think that it's taken time to get there because it was the story in my mind for so long. And then it showed itself in friendships, my relationship with my mom, relationships of looking kind of for that savior. Because it's my whole life, I remember having conversations with my mom and asking questions about my dad, and she really wouldn't answer them. And it was, in her mind, out of protection. But for me, that left me with even more questions in my head that I was answering for myself. And those answers weren't healthy, they weren't true. And so I remember one of our sessions getting off the call and being like, wow, it was that moment where I was like, this had nothing to do with me. And it freed me from obligation of needing a savior. And I think that I was in search of that because I was waiting for the day that my dad would come back and like save me almost. And it wasn't me physically, but it was my mind. Like I wanted the questions to be answered. And so I thought that if he came back, it would just solve everything. And so fast forward, from a little girl, now I'm a teenager, and it's long story short, we get in connection, and I go and see him, and it just wasn't what I thought it would be. We don't have a relationship to this day, and it genuinely was God's protection and grace on my life. And I've had to work to understand that God can be that for me, and being able to accept that, I think that was where the trauma really showed itself, because I didn't know how to allow people into that space. It's the same thing with my grandpa. He played that role, but it's still not your dad, And so the little t of that would be, I'm not worth it. Everybody else is going to leave just like he did. And I've lived with that message, and I'm 29 years old, and I'm just to the place now where I realize that his actions were not a result of anything to do with me, but of his own trauma and his own stuff. And I have to free myself of believing that I can take any part of ownership in that. And so it's allowed me to take ownership of my life by removing the ownership from his life, if that makes sense.
How did your relationship with your parents affect how you saw yourself, how you thought about beauty and your own personal aesthetic?
Well, I come from two different worlds because my grandparents were heavily involved in my life. And so I remember with my grandma, like we couldn't even leave the house in sweatpants or workout clothes or whatever. We had to be dressed to the T. Teeth were brushed, hair was brushed. You had in a bow or a beret. Everywhere we went, you were dressed for your Sunday best. So I think that the message I adopted through that was appearance over everything. That is priority. When people see you, they need to see your best. And then with my mom, she was completely opposite. Like, would never tell us to change. Whatever we put on was fine. And so I consider myself lucky being able to see both sides of that coin. Although there was some messages I adopted, I was happy that I got to know both sides because I feel like it makes me more relatable to people and their journey and their upbringing and how they were raised and messages that they've adopted because I have both sides.
And how have your thoughts around that changed, or have they, since you've been in coaching?
Yeah, that's a great question. I believe when it comes to appearance, first and foremost, it's for you. If you're doing it for somebody else, the motive isn't going to be pure. And so that's kind of how I live my life now. Do I like what I'm wearing? Do I care about what I'm wearing? I'm running to the grocery store. Do I care to change, brush my hair, put on makeup, all of the things, X, Y, and Z? Or am I okay in my sweats just running to the store and coming home? Although I was raised to believe that I need to do all of those things in order to get out of the house, what in my core, who I am, what do I believe? And I believe that it's to each its own. If one day I want to go get dressed and go to the grocery store, that's okay. That doesn't mean the next time I have to do the same thing. And so I like to base it off of that, time, my mood, things like that.
You've had medical aesthetic treatments.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so
What's your biggest takeaway from this conversation? And what topic are you dying for us to cover next? Comment below and be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And tell a friend. Together, we'll grow this channel and the Bianca movement. We'll see you next time here at the intersection of inner and outer beauty.